I'm innocent, I am not guilty. I'm a decent man, I am still the president of my country, quote unquote. This is what the toppled Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro pleaded in his first hearing at the Manhattan court. Hello and welcome, you're watching NewsX Deep Dive. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. Today we're discussing what went down on Maduro's first day of trial in an American courtroom. Let me take you through how the day unfolded for Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. Well, at 10:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 9:21 p.m. Indian time, the couple arrived at the downtown Manhattan heliport in handcuffs and were flanked by heavily armed DEA agents. After an hour and a half at 12:09 p.m. EST, Nicolás Maduro was brought into the New York courtroom wearing a blue prison uniform. At 10:51 a.m. EST, which is 9:21 p.m. Indian time, the couple arrived at the downtown Manhattan heliport in handcuffs. After an hour and a half at 12:09 p.m. EST, Nicolás Maduro was brought into the New York courtroom wearing a blue prison uniform. Courtroom sketch made by artist Christine Cornell. Maduro shook hands with his lawyer, Barry Pollack, before taking his seat, while his wife appeared moments later. We'll circle back to Maduro's lawyer later as well. The couple was then seated at one table wearing headphones to provide translation, and Judge Alvin Hellerstein was presiding. Before starting the hearing, Judge Hellerstein addressed the courtroom. He said, "It's my job to assure this is a fair trial, and that's what I intend." As the hearing proceeded, Judge Hellerstein asked Maduro to identify himself. In Spanish, he said, "I'm the president of Venezuela, and I was captured at my home in Caracas, Venezuela." When asked for his plea in connection with the 4 charges against him, Maduro professed his innocence. The Venezuelan president also indicated that he had yet to read the indictment, but declined an offer from the judge to have it read in court. "I would rather read it personally," he said. But for the viewers, Maduro is accused of overseeing a cocaine trafficking network with international drug cartels and faces 4 criminal counts: narco-terrorism, cocaine importation conspiracy, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices. He listened to an interpreter through headphones as Hellerstein summarized the charges. When prompted, Celia Flores identified herself as the First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela. She also entered a not guilty plea. "Not guilty, completely innocent," she said in Spanish. Maduro's wife will be represented by Houston-based attorney Mark Donnelly, appearing pro hac vice. He is a former federal prosecutor in Texas who worked on behalf of the Texas House of Representatives on the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. Paxton was acquitted by the state. Senator Pollack, Maduro's lawyer, described Maduro's arrest as an abduction. He said he expected to file extensive motions as the case plays out. As the judge informed the couple of their right to confer with officials from the consulate of Venezuela, both Maduro and Flores indicated that they wish to do so. Maduro said that he would like to have a consular visit. The couple both waived their right to seek bail for the time being. The judge set the next hearing for the 17th of March. As the hearing ended, Maduro also got into a brief verbal altercation with a demonstrator who called him an illegitimate president as he was exiting the courtroom. Maduro responded in Spanish, "I'm a kidnapped president. I'm a prisoner of war." Now let's come back to Maduro's attorney. Barry Pollack is a prominent criminal defense attorney in Washington, D.C. and a partner at the law firm Harris St. Laurent and Wechsler LLP. He has a notable history of representing controversial figures in complex cases, including the long-term representation of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Another high-profile client was Marty Tankleff, a New York man who was exonerated after serving 17 years in prison for wrongful conviction charges that he had killed his parents in their home in the upscale waterfront village of Belterre in New York. The judge presiding over the case of Maduro and his wife is 92-year-old Judge Alvin Hellerstein. The case in which Maduro was indicted in 2020 was filed 15 years ago in Hellerstein's court and has seen the conviction of Hugo Armando Carvajal, the former intelligence chief of the Latin American country. During his long and eventful career, Hellerstein has presided over several civil cases stemming from the September 11, 2001 Al-Qaeda attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. He's also faced off against Donald Trump on some occasions, rejecting a request by the president to have his New York hush money case moved to federal court. Hellerstein also blocked the Trump administration last year from deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members without a court hearing. The prosecution in Maduro's trial is being led by federal prosecutors from the U.S. Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kyle A. Wershba spoke on behalf of the government on the trial. Washpai has been involved in the case since the initial indictment back in 2020 and played a leading role in the prosecution of former Maduro ally Cliver Alcala Cordones, who had been a general in Venezuela's military before falling out with the socialist boss and later pleading guilty to providing material support to FARC, an anti-government armed militant group in Colombia that US officials said trafficked tons of cocaine to American soil. So as day one of Nicolás Maduro's trial ends, the legal battle now unfolds against a far more complicated backdrop. The US once built its case around the so-called Cartel de los Soles, a term now increasingly described not as a drug cartel, but as a system of corruption tied to Venezuela's leadership. With the Justice Department itself scaling back that language, critics are now questioning whether America's actions, including Maduro's dramatic capture, were driven by security concerns, political strategy, or something in between. And that is why this case is being watched so closely, because beyond the courtroom arguments and legal charges, it may also test the credibility of the narrative Washington built around Venezuela and what truly justified bringing Maduro here to stand trial. Joining us live to discuss this further is Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former diplomat. Ambassador Dayal, how do you view the first day of the Maduro trial, how it panned out, and how things will proceed from here?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. The first day panned out on expected lines. The prosecution unsealed the indictment, which is 25 pages, and it was revealed that Maduro and his co-defendants, including his wife, Celia Flores, faced 4 primary counts. Firstly, accusations of leading a cartel of the Suns that conspired with terrorist organizations like FARC to use cocaine as a weapon against the US. Secondly, allegations of facilitating the shipment of thousands of tons of cocaine into the US dating back to 1999. 3, use of military-grade weaponry to protect and promote drug trafficking operations. And last is the charge relating to possession of machine guns and all these offenses relating to firearms. Now, Maduro's legal team signaled a defense centered on challenging the court's jurisdiction rather than the evidence itself. His attorneys labeled the US Special Forces raid in Caracas a military abduction or kidnapping that violated international law. Now, the defense argues that as the head of a sovereign state, Maduro is entitled to absolute immunity from prosecution in domestic US courts. Maduro, of course, continues to assert his status as the sitting president of Venezuela. But this is a point which the US government disputes, as it does not recognize his recent election victories. Now, under the US law, Maduro can be and currently is being tried in the United States. Let me explain. While sitting heads of state typically enjoy absolute immunity under international law, the US government has not recognized Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate president since 2019. Now, under US law, the executive branch holds the exclusive authority to recognize foreign governments. Now, because the US does not recognize Maduro,
Yes.
courts treat him as a private individual without sovereign immunity.
Yes. Now, also, as far as, of course, the fact that he is a head of state, a sitting head of state right now, does that allow him any special privileges, Ambassador Dayal, in the United States? Of course, he has requested for consular access. He has also, of course, he's being represented, as is his wife, by pretty competent attorneys who, of course, do have a track record in the past as well of representing controversial figures, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. So how do you view, A, if he'll get any special privileges, and B, his defense in terms of consular access and also legal defense in court?
Well, I don't think he'll get any special privileges because, as I just stated, the US does not recognize him as the legitimate president of Venezuela, and therefore it does not recognize him as a head of state. The US feels that the elections were manipulated, they were not fair, and that they were stolen elections. So, for this reason, the prosecutors are unlikely to agree to any sort of special privileges, and they will impress on the court not to grant him any. Now, let me also mention that the prosecutors cite the 1989 capture and the 1992 conviction of Panama's leader, Manuel Noriega, as the prime legal precedent for trying a foreign ruler on federal drug charges. So exactly the same things might follow as were done in Noriega's case. And as I said earlier, I don't think Maduro will get any special privileges. Of course, a lot of global leaders have condemned the abduction, and even the United Nations Secretary General has said that the US action in Venezuela was a violation of international law.
Okay.
But nonetheless, as the world grapples with this highly unusual and controversial military seizure by the US of another world leader, the criminal case against Maduro will work through the US justice system much like any other suit.
Will this be a fast-track trial, though? By when do you believe it'll conclude?
Well, I don't think it's being fast-tracked. You know, the next hearing itself is on 17th of March.
Absolutely.
So after a gap of such a long time, over 3 months. So I don't think there's any intention to fast-track it.
Okay. Okay. Ambassador Dayal, we leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this segment.